Welcome back, listeners, to BizBlend podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and today we are going to dive into a story that blends grit, leadership, and healing in ways that aren't always talked about in the boardroom or even in the gym. Listeners, my guest, Rich Brown, is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran who carried his leadership lessons from combat zones into the business world. And he is now an executive protection specialist, gym owner, and event director who leads with discipline, service, and heart. But what makes his journey even more powerful is his willingness to talk openly about resilience and invisible battles, mental health, identity after service, and building community around purpose. So, to all the listeners, this isn't just a conversation around entrepreneurship or leadership or just simply mental health. It's about what happens when strength meets vulnerability and how carrying a weight, whether it's 22 pounds in a ruck or years of unspoken trauma, can actually become a bridge to healing. So, listeners, let's quickly get into it. And Rich, welcome to the show. And I'm really, really honored to have you here with us.
No, thank you, Sana. That was a wonderful, very warm introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Rich, for your kind words. And it's so interesting to know that you have led Marines in combat, and now you lead communities through fitness and events, which is such a noble work to do. And leadership, I think, in both these spaces, they require decisiveness, but also empathy. So, from your perspective, Rich, what's the biggest misconception people have about leadership when, transitioning from military to business?
Well, the biggest misconception I would think would be, unfortunately, I think we have a major lack of leadership in our communities. We're not teaching it at any level in our public education, hardly teaching it in private education. If you want to learn leadership, you pretty much have to join the military or be a part of some type of sports team where you have someone to learn to model your form of leadership after. But I think there's a lot of misconception around, I tell a lot of people that you need to be tough in tough situations and tender in tender situations.
Mhm.
And I think we get the tough part right easily, right? It's easy to be tough, especially when someone's presenting you with an obstacle or they're going against the culture in your organization that you've built, et cetera. It's easy to be tough. It can be difficult to be tender, especially
Mhm.
for the male military types. And that's hard to learn. And it starts, as you said, with empathy.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because, and it's also kind of, a perception that whenever we talk about leadership, people always see it as, someone who's commanding, aggressive, always giving orders. But what you are showing and really shared right now is how it can evolve into caretaking as well, even when it's a high performance environment. And I think that's something, requires a lot of, pivotal shift. And talking about, honor bound fit, how do you make sure that leadership isn't just about pushing people harder, but also protecting them from burnout or injury? I mean, people sometimes they associate with their own journeys or they give examples of people in their acquaintances who have gone through similar transitions or shifts. So how do you do that, Rich?
I think a very basic leader knows how to motivate people, how to push them to achieve what they otherwise may not have the strength to achieve. But a great leader knows when to pull back and knows how to measure the limitations of their subordinates and act accordingly. The last thing we want to do is hurt any of our gym members. For one, we don't lock them into a membership. So if we hurt them, we can't make any money off of them, right? But, we call this CrossFit rehab. We're not a CrossFit gym. In fact, we have a lot of former CrossFit competitors who come to us and we help them heal up and regain some of the strength that they've lost from injuries. But yeah, a lot of it is being able to assess the limitations of yourself and those under you, and knowing when to allow them to give themselves permission to pull back.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Talking about discipline and service, because these are some of the core military values. And as a veteran owned business founder, you have brought these into entrepreneurship. But, sometimes people say that values, they don't always pay the bills. So, how do you balance sticking to your principles even while facing the realities of, hardcore business or entrepreneurship like cash flow, competition, risk, technology and digital transformation?
Well, one of the ways is we're very vocal about what our values are and what our core values are. We have 14 core values at Honor Bound Fit. We put them on the wall in the gym. We put them on the backs of our shirts. We put them everywhere. We talk about them frequently. We make blog posts. We make videos. Every chance we get, we're trying to talk about our core values. And we have values for my private security business as well. But one of the values of Honor Bound Fit is surround yourself with good people who hold you accountable to your values, goals, and commitments. And so that one core value is telling all of our gym members, if you see us betraying these other core values, we hope you'll speak up, right? Another one is good friends have hard conversations, and that's part of it. You have to surround yourself with people who know what you're trying to achieve, who know what your values are, and who you've committed yourself to, and not only recognize when you're not following your own commitments, but have the backbone to inform you and hold you accountable. I recently heard an Army sergeant major talking about a lot of the young recruits and how they're requesting mass and they're formally asking for help because they feel like they're being bullied. And he said, a lot of times bullying, what feels like bullying is just the people who care about you holding you accountable. That's not bullying, that's love.
Tough love. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a very thin line. And I really like that because it's not just about the typical, business principles, profits on numbers. It's more about alignment. And that's what I think also gives a unique identity to a brand staying in power. So that's a really interesting way to see it. And also adding to this, I would bring in community because you mentioned in some of your core values about how good friends, they have hard conversations. Community is at the heart of both your gym and even your, event. We'll come to that in the later part of the conversation. But now sometimes community takes time, it takes energy. It often also takes money before it gives anything back. So do you see community as a business strategy or more as a personal mission?
I think it's more of a personal mission, but I honestly believe that if you do the right things by the right people, success will follow. You have to have a good product. You have to have processes in place to get your product to your consumers. But if you're constantly doing the right thing by the right people, everything else will fall in place.
Yeah, that is true. And do you have ever had to choose like between profitability and sense of community? Like, have there been any such kind of decisions or situations where you had to sacrifice one for the other, something like that?
Not an honor bound fit, but as well, I also own a business called Leftwich Global Protective Services. It's a executive protection business. It's essentially a pretentious way of saying bodyguarding. We provide bodyguards for CEOs, celebrities, etc. And there's been a handful of times in the last 4 or 5 years where I've had to fire my own clients because I was happy for the business, the income is good. When you fire a client, you have to find some place to employ your employees. But if I believe everyone deserves a certain amount of safety, but if you are frequently doing immoral things, you do deserve safety, but you don't have to get it from us.
Mm.
And so I've chosen on more than one occasion to tell my employees, like, look, uh, I understand it's a paycheck, but we're going to choose not to support this type of behavior, and we're going to cancel this contract, and we'll find somewhere else to put you.
Yeah, I think that is such a, if rationally we see from a business perspective, it's such a difficult decision that we have to take. That's kind of dilemma that, goes within, internally within you, that do I choose profit? Do I choose money, or do I choose my values, my morals? That is really, really commendable, Rich, that you always go with your morals, your principles, and your values, and also then find some creative ways to compensate that gap created. I think that is difficult and hard, but a very, very noble way, especially in business. I would also like to bring in the aspect of mental health because, Rich, you have been in the military, world, in the world of Marines, and we see a lot of kind of a weight carried by veterans, from those wars and battles, and it's quite sometimes very horrifying experiences that we get to hear. So for that, you have created Guidon 22. It's a 22-mile ruck to honor veterans lost to suicide. And that speaks to both awareness and action. But, when it comes to mental health, Rich, do you think the business and fitness worlds are still too performative about resilience instead of really addressing the deeper wounds?
No, I don't think so. I think they certainly have their own spheres. There is certainly a connection between mental health and physical health. The more that you are taking care of yourself,
Mhm.
cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory, that type of health, the more active you stay, the easier it is to control your mindset. And so you're seeing a lot of pushes, even at the veteran affairs level, to find ways to get those veterans who are suffering from suicidal ideology, et cetera, out of isolation and not only just out into the community, but to go perform in physical events, physical activities that will engage their body as much as their mind. Uh, we believe, one of our other core values is be useful. And that's very simple. It's the simplest core value we have. It's two words, but I think it carries a lot of weight because a lot of the people who are, inside and outside of the veteran community, people who are really struggling with suicidal ideation are feeling like they don't have much value. And so it's one thing to try to change someone's mindset about how much they're worth. It's another to say, go out and find worth. Go find a way to be useful to people in your community. Go find a cause to rally around. Part of the reason we call it Guidon 22 is twofold, right? So the Guidon is a military flag and it represents a unit. And on the battlefield before modern communications, before we had radios, we had the Guidon, and it was the original way that a military unit said, "I'm here. I've got your six." You see change command ceremonies where the guidon is passed from leader to leader. And so it represents the unit, but it also represents responsibility. And there's kind of this status quo in the veteran community right now where you get out of the military and whether you choose to stay near where you served or go back to your hometown or whatever, the mindset is kind of, I'm going to use my DD 214. I'm going to use my retirement papers as rolling paper, and I'm just going to get high and collect disability and play video games for the rest of my life. And they go into this kind of self isolation. And what we're trying to tell them with Guide on 22 is, that's not the Marine who stood on the yellow footsteps. That's not the same person who raised their hand and swore to defend the Constitution. So find that person within you again. Find a way to go back in your community and be useful to people around you. Find a cause to rally around, pick up your guide on and lead. We're trying to inspire these veterans who are otherwise feeling like they don't have much use to society to find a way to be useful, find a way to be a role model in your community.
That's super, super impressive, Mitch. That's really, really commendable. Commendable. Yeah, of course. These two words, they are just two words, but when we think about the meaning here, it has a lot of weight, a lot of weight. And I, I, I'm personally curious to know, Rich, that you transitioned from marine to entrepreneurship, and of course, these two they have their own set of parallels, a lot of principles, a lot of ways common, but then there are also a lot of difference between both of them. So, and entrepreneurship is we all talk about, especially in the conversations on BizBlend, that it's comparatively an isolating journey. How was this phase of transition? How was it like for you? Like, did you find anything surprising that you had to actually learn from the scratch? Or, did you struggle or was it like easy for you? I mean, if you can share.
Sure. So, a
Mhm,
couple of things. So, I think I was a freshman in high school when my mother gave me a copy of Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. So I was a freshman when I started having ideas about entrepreneurship. I
mhm,
was a sophomore in high school when 9/11 happened. And so almost immediately after 9/11, I gave up any thoughts about entrepreneurship and started
mhm,
thinking about joining the Marine Corps. And so
mhm,
I joined the Marine Corps the day after my 17th birthday, and I shipped off to boot camp 4 days after high school graduation. And I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, and I probably would have made a career out of it. But in 2007 in Haditha, Iraq, I was blown up by a 13-year-old boy driving his grandpa's truck loaded down with explosives. And that caused pretty significant brain damage. At the
mhm.
time, it seemed like a mild concussion, but over the years, it started to develop into more significant symptoms. And
Okay.
so after I left 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines and started teaching at the basic school, I was officially diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, and I was told that I wouldn't be able to reenlist. And so they wouldn't let me reenlist, but they allowed me to finish out my contract. So I had about 3 to 3.5 years left in the Marine Corps, knowing that I wouldn't be able to reenlist. And so that's when the ideas of entrepreneurship started to come back. And so I think I had 2 years left in the Marine Corps, 2 years on active duty when I started my first private security company. And so when most Marines are getting out of the Marine Corps, they start going to job fairs and looking for their next job and what they're going to do with their life. And the day after I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to a job fair, but I had a table because I was hiring other Marines or other veterans to come work for
Wow.
me.
Mhm,
The transitions, the kind of tougher transitions and unexpected obstacles, I would say I started seeing a psychologist after I got stationed at Quantico because I felt like I lacked empathy. One of
mhm,
the things that's very, very important to me, I felt like it was non-existent, and I didn't want to feel heartless. To go from combat arms and leading troops in combat and making life and death decisions for other men, holding my brothers as the life left their body, and leaving that type of environment and then coming back and trying to fit into a community where it's perfectly normal to need to take a anti-anxiety medication before you walk into the 7-Eleven because they might not have your cherry slushy and that could really screw your day up.
mm,
It was just hard to fit in. I felt like I was heartless, like I didn't have any empathy for anybody, and so I sought professional help for a while on and off.
mhm.
um, I'm better now. But
Very good.
there was a time there where I really struggled with that. I also struggled with, um, when I first started doing private security, I only hired military, law enforcement, and EMS professionals to work for me. Not because I think they're better people, but because I knew exactly what to expect from that community. But I found that some of our strengths can also be our limitations, right? So when you're employing a security guard to sit on a construction site overnight, or let's just say sit outside of a department store overnight while the store is being remodeled. When you put a guy who has served in combat and has kicked doors in and lived at that pace in a car in that parking lot, they couldn't be bothered. They don't care. They are the bump in the night. And so they spend a lot of time almost immediately on their phone, watching YouTube, whatever. Whereas if you put 19-year-old female in that same car, her eyes are going to be up and she's going to be watching her
Yeah.
surroundings for all the right reasons. And
Yeah.
so, just because we think we perform at a higher level doesn't necessarily mean we're the best person for that particular job at that time.
Oh,
Uh, I also struggled with, sorry, I don't mean to run on here, but
no,
I
please
really
go ahead.
struggled
Go
with
ahead.
the idea that, when you're in the military, you get new recruits to your unit, and
Mhm.
that's who you're getting. You don't get to say, "No, they're not deploying with us," or, "Can we trade him for this other person?" or,
Mhm.
"She's not fit for this deployment." That who you get
Mhm.
is who you get, and there is no firing anyone unless there's some type of, UCMJ legal process, whatever. And so then when I went into entrepreneurship, I had to learn how to accept that and, and realize that I have the ability to fire people and I should. I have the
Okay.
responsibility to fire people sometimes to protect the rest of my employees and my clients. And I
Mhm.
didn't have, I felt like if I fired somebody, I was admitting that I shouldn't have hired them in the first place and that I had made that error or that I was incapable of leading them to do better. And that was something that I spent a lot of time having to overcome.
Oh, thank you, Rich, for sharing these perspectives. Really, really interesting to know. Really interesting to know. I've never have had these heard before. That's very interesting. Um, uh, and I think that's why maybe there's some kind of contradiction that bringing a military mindset into business, it creates environments that are too rigid or too hierarchical. Um, did you think, Rich, there is truth to this criticism, or do people just misunderstand what discipline really means?
I think we all have a pretty good idea of what discipline means. I think maybe, I'm going to call back to our core values. Treat all people like individuals, not obstacles or objectives. Just because someone has a particular background or a particular brand of leadership or discipline doesn't mean that that's how they're all that they're capable of or all that they're going to draw from when it comes to dealing with obstacles in your business, right? Just because someone has a military background or, in my case, led troops in combat, doesn't mean that they're going to bring that militaristic discipline into your
Mm,
organization. I think, unfortunately, we try to protect ourselves with labels and by grouping people and looking for, common denominators. But you have to allow people to show you that they are an individual.
that is true. That is true. I mean, it's no black and white. It's not black and white. It's nuanced, it's gray, and I think everybody has that right to express and contribute as individuals. And Rich, finally, if our listeners, they would like to connect with you and explore more about the event that you're going to have, Guide on 22, what would be the best way?
Just as just to clarify, so Guidon 22 is a 22-mile ruck march with 22 pounds on November 22nd in Fredericksburg, Virginia. It's for
Mm.
veteran suicide prevention, but we also are there to talk about first responders and other people in our community who are kind of leading the charge in that space and removing themselves from society. You can find me on honorboundfit.com, on Facebook as Rich Brown or Honorbound Fit. We're trying to get everywhere as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, no, that's really impressive. And I'll make sure to have all the details in the show notes for our listeners for their quick and easy reference. And Rich, I couldn't thank you enough because you are carrying these conversations forward with so much honesty and depth. I think from the battlefield to the business floor, your journey, it reminds us that leadership isn't just about giving orders, it's about carrying burdens together. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And to all the listeners out there, whether you are an entrepreneur, you are a leader, or you're someone navigating your own invisible battles, please remember this, that resilience doesn't mean carrying the weight alone in isolation. It means finding the people, the values, and the mission that make it worth caring, like Rich is doing. Until then, this is BizBlend. I'm Sana, reminding you that success and strength mean nothing without community and care. Do make sure to explore Guidon 22 and do make sure to connect with Rich. I'll have all the links in the show notes along with this episode on your favorite podcast platform. Until then, this is your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.